Welcome back to the channel. If you love stories that pull you in slowly and don't let go, stay with this one until the end. And if this is your first time here, consider following for more. Coralie Vos was 19 when she signed her name on a piece of paper that made her the owner of 40 acres she had never set foot on. She didn't sign it out of ambition. She signed it because it was the only door still open to her. A year earlier, her father had remarried a woman named Denise, and within 6 months of the wedding, Coralie had packed 2 duffel bags and moved into her car. Nobody had shouted. Nobody had thrown her out. It was quieter than that, a slow redrawing of who belonged in the house, until one evening Denise mentioned, almost gently, that Coralie's room would make a lovely sewing room, and her father had said nothing at all. Silence, Coralie learned, could end a childhood just as completely as any slammed door. She worked double shifts at a diner outside Asheville for a year, sleeping some nights in the car, other nights on a coworker's couch, saving every dollar that wasn't spent on gas or food. She wasn't saving for anything specific. She was saving because stopping felt like disappearing. Then she saw the listing, a collapsing farmhouse 2 counties over, sold for almost nothing because the county records office couldn't find a living owner to contest the back taxes. The photos showed a sagging porch, a barn with its roof caved in on one side, fields gone wild with John songgrass. It looked like the kind of place nobody wanted. That was exactly why Coralie wanted it. She drove out on a gray October morning, gravel popping under her tires, and parked in front of a house that seemed to be holding its breath. The windows were fogged with dust on the inside. A tin mailbox hung crooked on a post, the name painted on its side long since sun-bleached into nothing. She sat in the car for a long moment before she got out, the engine ticking as it cooled, a single crow calling somewhere behind the barn. "Well," she said to no one, "guess it's just us now." She didn't know yet that the house had been waiting, in its own way, just as long as she had. That somewhere behind its walls was a piece of paper that would ask her a question nobody had ever asked her before. Not what happened to you, but what will you choose to do with what you found? If you've ever started over with almost nothing, let us know in the comments. Coralie's story is really about to begin. The first night, Coralie slept in her car in the driveway. She told herself it was because the house needed airing out. But the truth was simpler. She wasn't ready to be alone inside 4 walls that belonged to her and no one else. By morning, curiosity won over caution. She pushed open the front door, its hinges groaning like something waking from a long sleep, and stepped into a front room thick with dust and the smell of old wood and mouse droppings. Sheets covered a couch and 2 chairs, ghostly shapes in the gray light. A grandfather clock stood stopped at 4:17, its pendulum frozen mid-swing, as if time itself had simply given up in this house years ago. She spent the first week clearing rooms one at a time, hauling out rotted curtains, broken chairs, a mattress that had become a home for something with claws. She learned the house's habits, which floorboards complained under her weight, which window in the kitchen let in the morning sun just right, warm and gold across the counter. She talked to the house sometimes, the way people talk to dogs or plants, not expecting an answer but needing the sound of a voice. "You and me," she told the kitchen one evening, wiping grime from a cracked window pane. "We're going to figure this out." An elderly neighbor named Willard Pruitt came by on the 3rd day, driving a truck older than Coralie herself, to ask if she needed her water line checked. He'd farmed the land next door for 40 years, and had known the family who once lived in the house, the Ashworths, he said, though the name meant nothing to Coralie yet. "Strange people," Willard said, leaning against his truck bed, chewing something slow and thoughtful. "Kept to themselves. There was a fire out here. Oh, must be 20-some years back. Barn burned bad. Never did rebuild it right. Old man Ashworth passed not long after, and near as anybody knows, there wasn't family left to claim the place. No children? Coralie asked. Willard's eyes flickered, just briefly, toward the house behind her. There was a daughter. Don't know what became of her. Left before the fire, I believe. Some families are like that. Everybody just sort of drifts off, and nobody talks about why. Coralie felt something tighten in her chest at those words. Drifted off. Nobody talks about why. It sounded uncomfortably close to her own story, just told about different people, in a different decade. That night, working late by lamplight, she noticed something odd about the wall behind the kitchen pantry. A section of plaster slightly newer than the rest, patched with a different texture, as though someone had once repaired a hole and never bothered to match the paint. She ran her fingers over it, feeling the faint seam beneath the surface. It was such a small thing. She almost let it go. But something about the mismatch nagged at her, the way an unfinished sentence does, and she found herself standing there long after she should have gone to bed, staring at a wall that seemed, in the dim light, to be hiding something it wasn't ready to give up yet. She didn't touch it that first night. She told herself it was nothing. Old houses were full of patched plaster, mismatched paint, decades of small repairs nobody bothered to explain. But over the following days, whenever she passed the pantry, her eyes went back to that seam in the wall, and the nagging feeling refused to fade. It was a Tuesday, nearly 3 weeks into her new life on the farm, when she finally gave in. She'd been prying up warped floorboards in the hallway, and still had the crowbar in her hand, when she found herself standing in front of the pantry wall again, tracing the patched square with her thumb. "This is stupid," she said aloud, mostly to talk herself out of it. Then she set the flat edge of the crowbar against the seam, and pushed. The plaster gave more easily than she expected, crumbling in dry chunks that puffed dust into the air, and made her cough. Behind it wasn't brick or insulation, but a narrow gap between the pantry wall and the kitchen chimney, a hidden cavity no wider than a shoebox, clearly built that way on purpose, not by accident of construction. Inside sat a metal tin, rusted at the seams, the kind that once held sugar cookies or sewing notions. Coralie lifted it out carefully, her heart beating faster than the moment probably warranted. She carried it to the kitchen table and sat down before she opened it, as though some instinct told her this required stillness. The lid stuck. She worked her thumbnail under the edge until it popped free with a small metallic sigh. Inside was a folded stack of papers, gone soft and yellow with age, a woman's wedding ring wrapped in a handkerchief, and a photograph of a young woman standing in front of the very barn Coralie could see burned and half collapsed from the kitchen window. The young woman in the photo had dark hair pulled back loosely, a guarded half smile, and eyes that looked like they were already somewhere else, already leaving. Coralie turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded pencil were 4 words: "Forgive me, if you can." She sat with that for a long moment, the tin open in front of her, the house utterly silent except for the tick of the old clock she'd finally gotten running again. Whoever this woman was, she had hidden something here deliberately, sealed it inside a wall, and left words behind meant for someone specific. Someone who was never meant to find this by accident. Coralie's hands weren't quite steady as she unfolded the topmost paper. It wasn't a legal document, not a deed or a will. It was handwriting, a letter, several pages long, the ink browned but still legible, addressed simply, "To whoever finds this house after me." She glanced toward the window, half expecting to see someone watching, though there was only the empty yard and Willard's cattle grazing in the distance. Then she looked back down at the letter in her hands, aware that whatever this woman had needed to say, she had trusted these walls to keep it safe, until the right person came looking. Coralie took a breath, and began to read. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, the kind of penmanship taught in schools that no longer existed. Coralie read slowly, sounding out the words in her mind as though the woman were speaking them aloud. "To whoever finds this house after me, my name was Ruth Ashworth. Though by the time you read this, that name may mean nothing to anyone still living. I am writing this on the night before I leave, and I do not know if I will ever have the courage to come back for it, or for anything else I am leaving behind. I had a daughter. Her name was June. I want you to know that first, before anything else, because everything I did after was for her, even when it looked like the opposite. My husband was not a cruel man in the way people mean when they use that word. He never raised his hand to me, but he had a way of making a room feel smaller every time he entered it. A way of deciding what was true before anyone else got to speak. When June was 12, she told him she wanted to study music instead of taking over the farm records like he'd planned for her. He didn't shout. He simply stopped speaking to her at the dinner table for 11 days, until she stopped asking. I told myself I was keeping the peace by staying quiet. I understand now that peace built on someone else's silence isn't peace at all. The fire that took our barn also took something else, though nobody wrote it down anywhere official. My husband had been keeping bees in the loft, and June loved them the way some children love dogs. She knew each hive by its temperament. The night of the fire, she went back in for them. I have spent every year since asking whether I could have stopped her, and I have never once found an answer I could live inside comfortably. She survived. Her hands did not. Not fully, not the way they needed to for a violin. She left 3 weeks later, 19 years old, and I let her go without saying half of what I meant to say, because my husband stood in the doorway the whole time she packed, and I was afraid of what silence would cost me if I broke it. I do not know where she went. I have hired 2 men over the years to try and find her, and both came back with nothing. I write this letter now because I am leaving this house myself, finally, and I cannot carry the weight of it any further inside these walls. If you are reading this, it means the house passed to someone outside our family, which means I was never able to make things right in the way I hoped. But I am asking you for something anyway, because I have no one else left to ask. Behind the false wall, along with this letter, you will find a ring that was my mother's, and a small amount of money I've kept separate from the farm accounts for 30 years. Money my husband never knew existed, meant originally for June's music lessons. If you are able, if it is not too much to ask of a stranger, I would be grateful if you tried to find her. Tell her I know now what I should have known then. Tell her that love which requires silence isn't love worth keeping. I am sorry to leave you a burden instead of simply a house. But some walls hold up roofs, and some walls hold up the things we were too afraid to say. I hope you understand the difference, and I hope, wherever you are, that no one has ever asked silence of you, the way it was asked of me. Ruth Coralie set the letter down on the table with hands that had gone cold. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the loose pane in the kitchen window, and for the first time since she'd bought this house for almost nothing, it didn't feel empty at all. Coralie read the letter 3 times before she allowed herself to cry, and when she did, it wasn't loud. It was the quiet kind of crying that comes from recognizing yourself in someone else's grief. She thought of her father standing in a doorway of his own, saying nothing, while she packed 2 duffel bags into a car that barely ran. She thought of Denise's voice, gentle as a closing door. Love which requires silence isn't love worth keeping. Ruth hadn't been writing to a stranger. She'd been writing, somehow, to anyone who had ever needed to hear it. It took Coralie 4 months to find June Ashworth. She started with the county archives, then old church records, then a music school in Charlotte that had, decades ago, offered scholarships to students with physical disabilities. A long shot, but the kind of detail that stays lodged in memory once you've read it. A retired administrator remembered the name. Not fondly, exactly, but clearly. June had enrolled for a semester, she said, before withdrawing. There'd been talk that she'd gone into instrument repair instead of performance. Couldn't play the way she used to, but she could still hear a broken thing and know how to fix it. That single sentence was enough. Coralie found a small violin repair shop 3 counties north, tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered hardware store, with a hand-painted sign reading, Ashworth and Sons, though there had never been any sons at all. She almost turned around twice before walking in. June Ashworth was in her 50s now, gray threading through dark hair, her hands moving with careful precision over a cello's bridge, despite the visible scarring across her knuckles and palms. She looked up when the bell over the door rang, polite but unhurried, the look of someone used to strangers wandering in and out. "I bought your family's farm," Coralie said, because she hadn't been able to think of a gentler way to begin. "I found something in the walls. I think it was meant for you." June's hands went still on the cello. What followed wasn't the reunion of a movie, no rushing forward, no embrace. June listened in near silence as Coralie read the letter aloud in the cluttered little shop, surrounded by half-finished instruments hanging from the ceiling like patient ghosts. When Coralie finished, June sat for a long moment with her ruined hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. "She never came looking herself," June finally said. "It wasn't quite a question. She hired people twice. I don't know why they never found you." June let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Almost not. Because I changed my name for 11 years. I didn't want to be found. Not then." She looked toward the window, where afternoon light fell across dust motes turning slowly in the air. "I think I wanted her to want it badly enough to do it herself." Coralie didn't have an answer for that, so she offered instead the small bundle wrapped in the handkerchief, the ring, and an envelope with the money Ruth had set aside. June took the ring, but left the money untouched on the counter for a long moment, before finally, quietly, folding it into her coat pocket. "She's been gone 8 years, June said. "Cancer, I heard, though I wasn't there." Her voice didn't break, but it thinned, the way voices do when they're being held very carefully in place. "I used to think I'd feel nothing when I finally knew for certain. I don't feel nothing." Coralie understood that better than she let herself say aloud. She thought of her own father, still alive, still 2 counties and a lifetime away, and wondered whether some doors stayed open even after everyone assumed they'd closed. "I don't know if this helps," Coralie said quietly, but she knew, at the end, what she should have said. She wrote it down so someone would carry it to you, even if it was too late for her to say it herself. June looked at her for a long moment, something unguarded crossing her face for the first time since Coralie had walked in. "That's more than a lot of people get," she said. "I suppose it'll have to be enough. If you've ever wished someone had said the thing they never managed to say out loud, type enough in the comments below. I think a lot of us know exactly what June was feeling in that shop." Coralie drove home that evening, with the windows cracked, the cold air sharp against her face, feeling lighter than she had in longer than she could remember. She hadn't fixed anything, not really. June's hands would never play the way they once had. Ruth was 8 years in the ground, past any chance of forgiveness spoken face to face. Some things, Coralie understood now, simply couldn't be undone. But something else had happened instead, quieter, and maybe just as important. A message had traveled 30 years, and through a stranger's hands, to reach the person it was always meant for. That counted for something. Ruth had trusted a wall to hold her words until the right person came looking, and the wall had kept its promise. June visited the farm the following spring, the first time she'd set foot there since she was 19 years old. She walked the property slowly, pausing at the collapsed barn, running her scarred fingers along a beam that had somehow survived the fire. She didn't cry. She stood there a long while, and then she asked Coralie if she could see the kitchen wall where the tin had been hidden. "I want to help you patch it properly," June said. "Feels wrong, leaving a hole where a secret used to be." They worked on it together that afternoon, mixing plaster, smoothing it into the gap with a trowel June handled, with surprising steadiness, despite everything the fire had taken from her. When it dried, Coralie painted over it, and the wall looked, finally, Like any ordinary wall in any ordinary kitchen. No longer a place built to hide something, just a place built to hold a house together. Before she left that day, June pressed something into Coralie's hand. It was a small gold pendant, worn smooth with age. "My mother wore this every day I can remember," she said. "I don't need it to remember her by anymore. I've got the letter for that now. But I think you should have something of hers, since you're the one who brought her back to me, in a way that mattered." Coralie tried to refuse, and June wouldn't hear it. That winter, Coralie wrote her own father a letter. Not to fix anything, and not expecting an answer. Just to say the things that had gone unsaid the night she packed her car. Because she'd learned, from a stranger's confession hidden inside a wall, that silence was a debt that only grew heavier the longer it went unpaid. He never wrote back. But she didn't regret sending it. And some nights, that was enough to sleep peacefully on. The farm slowly became what Coralie had wanted it to be from the beginning. Not an escape from the life she'd lost, but the foundation of one she was building herself, plank by plank, season by season. She kept the letter framed on the kitchen wall, near where she'd found it. Not as a monument to sorrow, but as a reminder that even the quietest houses remember what the people inside them were too afraid to say. If this story moved you, stay close. There's another story waiting for you very soon, and I'd love to have you back for it.